Hey everyone, it's Barb Egan from Kelowna, British Columbia. And on today's Switch Research YouTube Live, we have a really hot topic. Did COVID spike my social anxiety? And I'm actually going to even bring on one of my guest therapists today. She works with me at my practice at Alive Counselling. She's phenomenal. She's incredible. And we're going to speak on what we've seen as therapists in the last 2 years. And we've had a really neat Hey again, everybody. It's Barb Egan with Switch Research. And on today's topic, we're going to talk all about social anxiety. Particularly, did COVID spike my social anxiety? And this is such a hot topic that we're working in as therapists, that we're experiencing as humans. And so for today's topic, I'm actually bringing on one of my team of therapists, Lauren Mills, to talk on this as well with me, because it's something we're seeing such a spike of, something that we're experiencing, because to some extent, I think everybody's experienced a heightened social anxiety, even if you've never experienced social anxiety, or maybe it was on that, it's more like a scale. If it was more on that, like 1 or 2 out of 10 before your experience, well, now maybe you're more like a 5 or a 6, or maybe you're someone who was experiencing some social anxiety, which is a really common thing that most people come to therapy for. You're already at that 6 or 7. Now it's that 8 or 9. And so we're seeing just this correlation with COVID and social anxiety. So I think it's such an important topic, one that we're seeing so much of. So I wanted to bring someone else on today as well, that we can dialogue about it, answer your questions. So feel free to, interact like always on the chat box. Welcome. We value that so much. Listen to the recording, and we'll kind of share some do's and don'ts, some tips and tricks of social anxiety. But at the bottom line is, as therapists, we are seeing a huge spike in social anxiety coming out of the last 2.5 years. And I think what's really unique is when Lauren comes on, I'll kind of get her to tell us a little bit about her and her background, but both her and I have worked extensively with university students. We have worked with adults. We have worked with high school students, and Lauren's background also is in athletics. She's an elite level athlete in the US, was a national championship coach here in Canada, and has coached so many athletes and teams in sports, and was a high school teacher. So she brings such an awesome perspective from high school, university, athletes, lay people, everybody, adults, what we've seen as counselors. And we've just seen everybody have a spike of this social anxiety. So we hope you resonate. We hope you take some tips and tricks. Again, I'm all about the evidence-based, but mostly the practical. How does it fit in your life? So we're going to talk about tips and tricks too of that. So welcome. And Lauren, if you're not on the screen yet, you'll see her lovely face here in a minute.
So thanks for the introduction there, Barb.
Yes.
So yeah, like Barb was saying, my background, I spent a lot of time as a high school teacher in northern Saskatchewan. I did some time in the States teaching down there as well, and on a sports scholarship. And something I kind of find that I see with, as you mentioned, university levels as well. And something I find that we're kind of seeing at the high school and university levels is everyone's experiencing anxiety, like whether it's athletic anxiety, social anxiety, school performance, like everyone's experiencing some type of level of anxiety, and kind of understanding how that affects us is really key in understanding how to manage these different levels of anxiety that we're all kind of dealing with in our day-to-day lives.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So Lauren, a little bit of your background. You're from a tiny little town, northern Saskatchewan, Canada.
Bransmith, Saskatchewan. No one will know where that is, but yeah, town of 30.
And I love hearing often in the chat box here, people will say, oh, hi from this part of Wisconsin, hi from Australia, hi from Canada. And so welcome. If you're on, feel free to say hi to where you're from. So Lauren went from way, way up north in Canada, a tiny little town with softball scholarship, down to where?
Started in Nebraska, Scottsbluff, Nebraska for a little bit. And so we said that was the same Saskatchewan. They just had corn instead of wheat, different crops there. And then I ended up down in Alabama. So the heat change was fantastic. And there's just a bunch of different, the environment, like the social aspects down there were quite a bit different than my Saskatchewan upbringing, I'll say.
So with that, because it's a different culture, like I'm American, I'm more like Nebraska type, like Ohio.
Yeah.
It's pretty Midwest, like straight out of a country music song, like pretty blue collar. I love it. It's beautiful in its own way. What was that like? I mean, did you ever experience social anxiety ever growing up or going from such a small town or a different culture to a new culture? What was that like?
Yeah. So definitely it was pretty nerve-wracking. I was 17, and so were two of my other teammates from Canada. And so all of us were 17, and we left our small towns in Sask and moved to entire different country, entire state we had never been to, and kind of just getting used to the differences and the social cues and the difference between the States and Canada. Just mostly the different language. We would get made fun of quite a bit for our accents, which would be kind of funny, but just kind of learning from each other. And that was one of the greatest experiences that I'd have to say, is being able to learn from the States and learn from different countries and stuff like that, and how people kind of socially interact and how they deal with certain things in their lives. And it kind of speaks a lot about who people are. It's just really interesting experiences there.
Did you experience any social anxiety, like in those team settings or school settings or that culture setting, being different, being new?
Yeah. So something I kind of noticed is I didn't actually feel a ton of that when I first went down to the States, because I had a team. The team atmosphere and playing on teams and stuff. I had a social group of people that I was together with them all the time. And it was really nice to kind of start out with that. I did spend a year at a school when I wasn't an athlete, and I could not get over the difference between environment when I didn't have a team and didn't have a bunch of people around, how that was the first time that I experienced real social anxiety in the States, because I didn't have that kind of structure and that background. And so talking to different people and kind of having a purpose outside of that athletic identity was kind of a big shift for me in trying to figure out, okay, what was my role and where I belonged in a different university setting, not so much as an athlete.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm going to give it over to the audience a little bit to say, have you ever experienced social anxiety, like ever throughout your life? Or have you, noticed an increase in the last 2 years? I mean, this is from a few years ago. This is without COVID, but I do think it's interesting. And I think that's a good tip that we can come back to later on, is finding your people, like it doesn't have to be a whole team of 20. You were a softball player. I was a hockey player. Like when I went somewhere, I went to Ohio State, the largest athletic department in the entire world. Like that can be intimidating. I came from a school of 600 kids total, from like 6th grade to 12th grade. And my graduating class was like 80. And so a tiny little town, tiny school, hockey focused school, go to this massive athletic culture, one of the largest universities in the world, largest athletic department in the world. And if I didn't have those 20 or so girls that I knew I belonged to, or made me special in a certain way, that I just had some people in my corner, oh man, I mean, it was nerve-wracking. It provoked social anxiety in that environment let alone everything else. Because I think sport can be a microcosm of life, but you could take that at school or your workplace. That could be a microcosm of the bigger life picture too, because we're all trying to figure out, where do I belong? Where am I at this like hierarchy? And I think there is a cultural difference too. I mean, a lot of our listeners are from the States. Happy 4th of July. If you're on, you're hopefully having some barbecues with your family. But if you come back and listen later on, that can be something to say, okay, it doesn't have to be everywhere. Like maybe your workplace, you're listening, your workplace is huge, or your school's huge, or you're not in a sports team and you're like, how do I find people here? How do I find where I belong? Start small, start with that little microcosm of what your ecosystem is. Like maybe for some people, it's a faith-based community. It's like a church. For some people, it's a hobby. And you do some of that right now, where it's like, you go and carve canoes with Indigenous communities. Like that's amazing. So finding, your people in those areas that you like to go to, your hobbies, like those like-minded connections, I think is really huge to combat some social anxiety too.
Yeah, that was actually one of the first things. I was a grade 9 teacher for the longest time, and bringing those kids are the most nervous coming to the high school setting and things. And so one of the things I would always recommend is join a club, just get out there. It's okay that you're nervous. Other people are nervous too in the same situations. And half the time people in the situations are so stressed and nervous about their own situation that they don't even worry about you. And so just to get out there, and it can be a small club, and it can be a sports team, or it can be like the drama club, like in those high school settings, that was big, just getting out there and trying a different community. Same thing in university. There's so many different clubs. And I was even working with some students during the pandemic, and they couldn't find their own club. And so they made their own club instead, and they attracted their own like-minded people to just kind of have that connectedness.
That's so neat.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So high school, because you have some experience there as a teacher, what did you see? I mean, I know this is a little bit before COVID too, but previously, like in therapy, in the psychology world, we called it the age of anxiety. This is before COVID. So we were seeing, all these up and coming high school students, university students, adults, we've seen a spike in anxiety over the last, say, 5-10 years. And then we have the last 2.5 years of a huge spike of anxiety. What were you seeing when you were teaching and in the high school setting? What did social anxiety look like there?
So I taught predominantly teenage girls, 9 through 12. So everyday anxiety.
I was one, so I get it.
A lot of anxiety. A lot of it is, though, I noticed at the time it was starting out with social media, but it was more kind of the online presence, because a lot of kids at that age, they're kind of starting to come and like figure out their own personality and who they are, type of thing, and who they kind of want to be. And so finding a lot in those, they're comparing themselves to others, or they're not kind of sure on how to interact with others. And so the social communication they found and how to interact on a daily basis was something very interesting and very unique to the generation coming up, because now, especially with after the pandemic and everything, so much of our world is digital and online, and we miss those little social cues of being in person, like facial gestures or kind of pauses. And is it a pause, or is it internet cutting out? I'm not quite sure. And
a misread text, or someone didn't like my post, or they used a period versus an exclamation mark, or not enough emojis. Like those are real communication factors that people interpret or misinterpret.
Yeah, and that's at the age when we're starting to learn those communication things. And so that's a big part of it, is trying to understand, okay, how do we communicate with each other? And like reading those texts, is it okay? Are they feeling this way or not? We read so much into things when they might not be thinking that at all. It's just straight text, and we kind of get that anxiety built up around it. That's what I was finding a lot with the girls. Age.
And I came from when I was in high school, it was anxiety provoking. And I think everybody had social anxiety to some extent. And I went to a school that you really did find your identity in sports. And for me, that was a huge battle, like my life after sports. Who am I? My identity, all of that. I went to a school with Nathan McKinnon, who just won a Stanley Cup, and Sidney Crosby, and all these hockey superstars. But we also had people who were like ambassadors kids from like the Czech Republic or South Korea, like really prestigious people. And like I said, I'm from the Midwest of the United States. Like my family was athletic and I come from a sports family, but I was by no means like fancy upbringing. So that was culture shock. And it was like, you know, when you're in high school, it's like what you're wearing or who you look like or who you hang out with, or those sort of things can make such an impact on people. I could not even imagine how, at least you got a break. Like, that's what I think back. At least I got a break. Like if someone that I compared myself to, maybe during the day at school, but when I was home or away from that person, I didn't see them all the time and I got a break. But now with social media, you don't get a break because you may see them at school, but then you really interact online or just see people's life and it looks so much better on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. And we didn't have it. Like I didn't have it like that in high school. I could only imagine the correlation. And I mean, I know statistically that it has spiked anxiety in general, depression, negative self-esteem, all of that. So what would you do like as that teacher? How would, I mean, if a parent's listening or a teacher or a coach or just someone, maybe you're an aunt or an uncle and you're listening in and you're like, oh, I have a teen in my life. How can I help them? Or I just have a person in my life, or that person's me. Like this happens to adults too. What would help that? How do you support someone going through that?
Yeah, even the comment that you made, like adults are going through that with this pandemic and everything. Like adults, we've also lost our social cues and kind of our understandings and how we interact in public sometimes. And
Yeah.
so one of the greatest things that like parents or people like with youth in their life can do is to sit down and have conversations face to face, put down the screens and just actually talk and work on communication skills. I find a lot of youth clients, their concerns is that people don't understand, their parents don't hear them and they don't understand them. And they kind of get touchy back and forth and quite upset when they know they're not upset with their parents, but they've kind of forgotten how, or they're not quite sure how to communicate. That's one of the things you find most is, okay, your kids are upset, but they don't know how to communicate what they're upset about or why, or they just feel it type of thing. So having conversations like, and admitting that as adults, like we don't know everything either. Like we get things wrong too. We need to brush up on some of these communication skills. So being an example and teaching these youth, like, okay, this is how we talk, this is how we communicate. And when things come up, it's okay to be upset, but okay, we have to handle it appropriately type of thing, and how we communicate when we are frustrated.
Right. And I see sometimes people, like when couples come in to work with me, even it's like, I don't know how to have that conversation, one will say, so I text it to them. Mm-hmm. And on one hand, I'm like, well, we're getting it out and maybe that's how you feel comfortable with. And that might be a step, but I can't stay there. We have to actually turn towards each other physically too. Yeah. And make that eye contact. To me, that's the biggest thing. Like whether you're a couple or a parent or a friend or a coworker, it's making eye contact. And sometimes I go into a cafe and, you know, I'm looking around and I'll make eye contact with the barista or someone in there and smile. But so often it's hard to actually make eye contact because people, maybe they're bored, maybe they're waiting in line, maybe it's an anxiety mechanism to cope of, I'm just going to go on my phone so I don't have to talk to anybody because I'm uncomfortable and I don't know how to, or make small talk, or, hey, how's your day going? And it's like, wow, if I can make eye contact and smile with someone or just ask, how is your day going? It really can make me change. It makes me feel better because I feel more connected to another human. But I wonder if that could help them too. Would you notice that it was hard for, whether it was high school students or university students that you've been working with or adults, that eye contact is maybe not as prevalent as it used to be?
Oh, completely. I would go into our lunchroom and there would be a table of 8 students, boys, females, and they'd all be staring at their phones. I don't know if they were texting each other or if they, and I would tell them, stack up your phones, have conversations with each other. And it was some of the most difficult things is to sit and actually be with someone without a device, because it is such a coping, it just feels, it's a coping mechanism to have their type of thing and look at it.
Yeah. So what are some tips? Like, how can we start conversation? Because people probably hear this and they're like, yeah, I do want to have more conversation with a real person, or I don't want to hide behind my phone. I think we all do this to some extent. Where do you start? Like, what do you say?
And so, because he also made the comment about the eye contact, and so I didn't point out it's like different cultures as well. As
Right.
teaching, I got to have so many interactions with great different cultures, and some cultures don't like
Right.
eye contact. It's a sign of disrespect and things. And
Right.
so,
Right. Yeah.
one of the great ways to start, and this is kind of a service we offer as well, is like walk and talk therapy,
Yeah.
is to maybe stand next to someone and go for a walk. If you're having a tough time reaching out to your kids, or maybe as a kid, you're having a tough time talking with your parents, ask to go for a walk with each other. And then so you get to stand next to each other. You're not confrontational. Maybe there's no direct eye contact. You're walking next to each other side by side and just kind of letting out some of those maybe frustrations that you wouldn't be able to say to their eyes or to their face, but kind of having them close and letting them know that, I need some support right now, but I'm not quite sure to ask for that.
Yeah. Yeah. What's kind of the invisible being unsaid right now? There's usually that going on. And I love that, because if you think about it, whether you're coming to talk to a counselor or a teacher or a coach or a parent or just even a friend, like even if there's no quote unquote power hierarchy between a youth and an adult, or if it's two adults or just two friends, even we're seeing a spike in social anxiety, even in quote unquote equal, social standings, like you're just friends, like there's no boss and employee kind of relationship. But if that there's anxiety there on the equal playing field, then there's going to be anxiety and social anxiety in when there's a gap, where that's a normal part of human dynamics. That's okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It just is what it is. But going down and just saying, hey, let's have a coffee and just sit across each other and look at each other and talk, that could be really intimidating. And I think of that often with counseling too. For some people, like that's not comfortable, even if, they're sitting in a comfy couch and they have their tea or coffee and we're in the chair over here. And that's why I do love that walk and talk therapy, because it's side by side, you're co-regulating together, because as humans, we're actually made to co-regulate. So a tip against social anxiety is to actually gently face that fear and be with people, with safe people. And we'll pop over to the chat box, but I just want to touch on one thing that Amanda had said earlier is I get very anxious in bigger group settings. I had to do a lot of this in business school. And that makes sense. Like when we're in bigger groups, that's often where we think social anxiety can come up. It can come up with one-on-one, like just trying to connect with one other person, being that a teacher, a coach, a parent, a friend, or it could be in those small, medium, larger group settings. And you never really know if someone's overtly socially anxious. Like it doesn't mean that they're really quiet or fidgety. I mean, sometimes, but for most of us, if you walk into a group and kind of give each other the benefit of the doubt that coming out of this pandemic, most of us are feeling probably a little anxious, it kind of softens it. That it's not just you're right. Like what you said before, it's, most people are so busy thinking about themselves that they're not really even thinking about me.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to go in and think, okay, they're probably feeling a little bit of this. Like maybe I'm feeling a 4 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, and they're feeling a 5 or a 3, but I don't know for sure. And if I can go in thinking that we're all kind of feeling this, that can really help. And breaking down those bigger group settings. Like, do you have any, as a former coach, because you coached university, you taught in high schools, you've worked in universities, counseling people the last year here. How do you break down the bigger groups into maybe finding that one person you can talk to, or a smaller group setting to help with that social anxiety?
Yeah, so there's kind of two things behind that. Is there's try at your own pace. And so it's what might be right for you, might not be right for someone else. And it just kind of depends on like where your social anxiety is. And so the other part of that is knowing your anxiety, instead of running from our anxiety and being afraid of it, is actually taking the time to understand our anxiety. Okay, like, well, this situation, does this cause a little more anxiety for me? Am I nervous about this situation? Because then when you try at your own pace, you get to dictate where you are and kind of ease into those situations. We found lots with the pandemic, especially the poor university students that had maybe just graduated in grade 12 and were in their first or attempting their first or second year, and things were online. And then being back in person with mass classrooms type of thing, in university classrooms, that was a huge adjustment and shift for a lot of people. And so some of the advice we tried to work on for some people is try at your own pace. Like maybe show up to university when you don't have a class, just to kind of walk around and get yourself used to the environment that's causing you this most kind of frustration or like tension and feeling that you got going on. But just gradually do it. It doesn't get easier if you completely avoid it. In fact, it only gets worse. The anxiety doesn't go away, it kind of only mounts. It becomes a bigger monster the next time. And so just taking the little steps and trying to conquer that every time and just realizing, okay, I was really nervous about this, and maybe it's okay, this wasn't as bad as I maybe thought it was going to be, type of thing. But just trying that out and just doing it at your own pace, type of thing.
I love that. And I think it's really wise, like whether it's going to your lecture hall early or a new job, or if you're trying to go out and meet people, like as an adult, it can be hard to make friends. And so if you're finding a group or one of those, church groups or a knitting group or book club or hobby or whatever, like you're wanting to meet people, a biking group, hiking group, something like that, maybe you find out where it is that you're meeting, like at this trail. And you go a day before and you just kind of get used to it just by yourself, or you bring your dog or bring a close friend, someone safe, and you just kind of get accustomed to it. That could be really helpful too. I love that. And in fact, so I'm quite outgoing. My mom is not. And so we grew up, she was actually like really anxious about driving. And so I had to drive 2 hours one way to hockey practice, like growing up in Wisconsin. And so we would drive down to the big city, Madison, Wisconsin, and we would go the day before often, like before practice, or especially the first time of anywhere new, we always had to go the day before and do a trial run. And this is before like Google Maps or cell phones. So I had to help her with the map and like all this stuff. But that's what we would do to kind of get orientated so that she would feel comfortable, to get me to a hockey tournament in the next morning. And I think that's really, I do that quite a bit even now before interviews or things like that. I like to go to the place like a day before and I have a coffee or tea and I just kind of sit in it. And I just kind of, sit in that space, or if it's a physical one, and just kind of get accustomed to it. And I really like that. I love that you said that, because I personally, I've just found a lot of, kind of enjoyment. It's not only just calm the anxiety, but it kind of shifts it to say, okay, this is my space now too. Like I belong here, which is really like a core theme of anxiety, is where do I belong, especially social anxiety? Do I belong here?
Yeah. And something I recommend, like for tools and stuff, when we do give different grounding tools to help with anxiety, is recommend to clients, okay, try this when you're at like a safe place or somewhere that you enjoy and that you're calm. Because trying these exercises when you're in the moment and you're scared and nervous, it's not going to help. You're already going to be at that heightened state, type of thing, and trying to bring yourself down won't work. So practicing those skills when you are calm and you are in a safe environment or something you feel comfortable with, so then your body can get used to those different feelings. And then when you get into the situation, you can call back to that state of calm and kind of those tools that you work on sometimes in therapy. So that's a huge part of it, I think.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. And we'll kind of shift gears. I'm going to pop into the chat and see. I've asked people to say, I just kind of asked them, where have you seen social anxiety emerge in your life? And has it heightened during the pandemic or not? And I'll share what a few of the responses are too. And this will be some good conversation, I'm sure too. And this is only a snippet of maybe 2 or 3 of them, but I bet this plays a part into what we can speak. We've been seeing in the university settings. Lauren's been on universities for the last year too, just working with students and adults of what we've been seeing. So Michelle says that she transferred to a new job. She has new supervisors to deal with. I misunderstood one and found myself in trouble. Now I had another misunderstanding with another one and find myself in that cycle again. Have you ever seen social anxiety in that situation? And do you have any tips for that?
Yeah. Sometimes with our social anxiety, I'm finding a little now too, as well, I didn't experience it before, is misinterpreting just like social cues or just conversations. Some people are reacting, I'm like, why are you responding that way to me, type of thing. And sometimes I have to take a moment and think about, okay, how am I feeling in the moment? Am I perceiving things a different way? Because we know when I'm at a heightened state, if I have a little bit more anxiety, I'm going to pick up things differently, or I'm going to react to them based on how I'm feeling, type of things. And I found that lots with my students when I worked with them is it wouldn't be about me during the day. They would react and they could turn on something because that's how they were feeling in the moment. And that's how kind of scared they were in those situations. And so a lot of times with that is just kind of be patient with yourself and give yourself a little bit of grace that, okay, maybe you did make a misunderstanding, but okay, then trying again, just being honest, be like, you know what, that wasn't my intention at all. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know, something happened here. Like, we're on a different page and that's not my intention. So how can we get back to where we want to be, type of thing.
Totally. And I think, like you said, owning it, like saying, hey, this is what I'm hearing from our conversation or this email. Is this correct? Am I missing something? Or if, depending on what the situation is, like just asking for clarity. I think you can't over communicate or be too clear in communication, especially coming out of, 2 years where maybe most communication has been via email or text or not in person. Even if it's via video, there can be some great things because you have the facial cues, but there is something that happens when we're in person with people. And a few others have kind of spoke on this too, of maybe feeling just a little nervous of going to places after COVID, if they've had compromised immune systems. And why I say being in person is so critical is because there's a lot of invisible that happens between two humans that we don't see that helps us calm down. In fact, that's probably the number one thing to help with social anxiety is to be present with someone, like getting out of your house, off of your computer, off of your phone with someone that you do really connect with. And one other person said, I'm good with eye contact. I'm craving that human connection. And I think that's at the key of all of this. We usually don't get anxiety about things we don't care about. So underneath all this, it means you care. It means you do crave connection, which makes sense because as humans, we're created for connection. And we have this thing called mirror neurons. And Lauren got to be a part of it this past year, but we did an equine therapy training. And it's used a lot with trauma. This is why you see animals, dogs a lot, but horses have more mirror neurons. And that's why we use them a lot with trauma work, is so that I could be feeling really anxious or re-triggered. So we've seen some women that we work with who have come from really horrendous abusive situations. And the farm was near an airport. And if they heard an airplane flying overhead, just that loud sound, again, it overwhelms the nervous system, this excess stimulus, re-triggering into a trauma response. Some women would actually get in kind of that fetal position and almost have a flashback. What the horses did because of mirror neurons is these women could borrow from the horse's calm and steadiness into their anxious state just by petting, just by making eye contact, just by doing movements with your body, because of these mirror neurons that we have with animals, but with humans too, that we help co-regulate, which is why safe family members, safe friends, counseling is so important.
Yeah, that was one of the major things from that is just like the presence. And sometimes you can feel it in counseling rooms and type of things. If there's a shift of energy, because people can use different terms for it, but there is some type of energy and connection between people that it is unspoken. And so that was a big part of that, is that equine therapy is giving some of that to the horses and just letting it go from people and just letting it go off their shoulders type of thing. That was massive.
Yes. So I think back to, that work example, if it's a new job in this kind of crazy time of the last few years, Michelle, you've never been here before. Give yourself grace. There's no reason you should be an expert at a new job with new people because you've never been here. Give yourself some time, ask for clarity that you are understanding correctly. And just even saying, lead with authenticity of your heart of, I want to understand, or I want to be clear in my communication. This matters to me. Like if I was a coworker or a boss in that situation, I would really value someone like that and say, oh yeah, it would probably make me second guess my communication to make sure it's clear too, because maybe their intention isn't to cause anxiety and they have no idea. But I think just having a lot of grace with yourself is huge. Cheryl says, I have no problem making eye contact. She's craving human connection, which again, that's what I said. Most people are at the core, we're all really craving that. We're created for connection. My issues are about COVID. So example, I'm still fearful of going into favorite coffee shops to sit or work, college professor when not on campus, Yeah, just in these public spaces. And Jamie says that too, like just commenting to Cheryl, I feel the same about that, about COVID. I've done very little because I have a compromised immune system, and they're just supporting one another. Like, yeah. So even whether you have, on the outside, genuinely healthy immune system, or maybe there's some things that are compromised, there's going to be anxiety. Like anxiety doesn't discriminate, unfortunately. And so again, kind of back to what Lauren says, and I'll let you share kind of what you've seen with maybe some of these university students, or just the pivot. I mean, like you mentioned, of this year. So at University of British Columbia, big university. We're in the Okanagan campus too. It's in person. Oh, it's online. Oh, it's in person. There's a lot of pivoting going on. Did you see this with students that you're working with?
Yeah, and that was one of the things that was hard is there was such flexibility that we're not used to. Like before the pandemic, everyone pretty much had pretty strict and regimented schedules. Okay, we do this. Our work schedules were kind of we knew how they were, type of thing, for month to month or year to year. And there was such a shift that it was planning for like people like to plan. And so especially people who have higher anxiety, they like to try and plan out their options so then they're prepared. And that was a huge thing, is it was just shifting back and forth. And so being flexible and kind of, like you said, giving yourself grace that you're trying to do the best in your situation, but understanding, okay, things have happened. Like it is difficult. Like I'm an athlete. I go to the gym all the time. I had a massive panic attack. I've never had that before, going to a gym because no one was wearing masks. Mm-hmm. Like things had opened back up at the time, but it was my first experience being around that. And it was just something I had to sit with. It felt awful to sit there in the moment, but just to kind of breathe and remember, okay, I've been in this situation before. This is how it was before. I just haven't. And so I'm trying to retrain my body and brain into that, because for 20 some years before that, I was used to all this, but then for the last 2 or however long, we have been training ourselves to get into this routine, into this thing. And so we look for those different areas of heightened anxiety and things. And so kind of retraining our brains into how we want to kind of perform in those situations when we do feel that type of anxiety.
And I think that's a good kind of analogy of how to perform in it, because one technique in performance and working with athletes and as athletes, we would visualize a lot. And I encourage people in social situations to do this too. Like get nice and calm. You can sit, you can lay down, take a few really deep breaths, and just kind of close your eyes. If you like to listen to, gentle music, if you like to keep your eyes open, that's fine. But it's about training the brain to see yourself being successful in these new situations. Because although you've gone to coffee shops before, you haven't gone to coffee shops after a pandemic on the 4th of July, in these big, massive parades or things like that. And everybody has different comfort levels, and that's okay. Like you're entitled to yours, just as somebody else is entitled to theirs. It's just to honor your boundaries. Like it's really about honoring your body and pay attention to those cues. But I really encourage people to visualize it, like visualize yourself being successful in these situations before you do it. Kind of like physically going to that place, or how my mom would take me a day early to know the way to get to that drive. Same thing is true visualizing. You don't have to actually go there. You could, if you want to, or like I said, go with someone safe that you feel really comfortable with, that you can co-regulate together, and just say, can we go just grab a coffee? And maybe we don't sit, like we just go in to get our coffee and then we leave. And then the next time we go and we stay for 5 minutes, and you put a timer on, and you just, somebody's calling, we have to go. Like you can kind of pretend that in your head and work up. That's one way to do it, kind of that exposure therapy. But I really encourage visualizing. Like sometimes it's just going to be getting calm, getting centered, and just visualizing yourself going back and enjoying it. Because right now you're not really getting any of the enjoyment or positive rewards of it. It's just the anxiety hijacking, not the, coffee with a friend, or getting to sit down and doing an honoring to you. Again, everybody is different. Every body is different. So if you feel comfortable still wearing your mask, go for it. You're honoring you. And you sit down and maybe you look around the room and you find 1 or 2 things that you really like about that coffee shop. or that meeting space or that person that you're connecting to in that conversation. But that's a really good, again, exposure and visualization can really help there, to just kind of warm up to it before you actually do it too.
And I like how you say the positivity behind the visualization, because we say it that way. Some people kind of like, oh, like I'm not going to positively visualize this. But if we stop for a second and think, how often do we negatively visualize something that, okay, the what if that can happen? And that's what we're training our brains to do. And that can go so quick. Okay, like this might happen, this, and it could be negative. But then just to stop and challenge and say, you know, it could go that way, but it could also go this way. Like there's two ways that it could go. And we do spend that time focusing on the negative when we can spend a little bit of that time solely challenging that with one or two positive things. And then really, okay, you know, this could be positive. This could be a good situation.
Right. Because if we are only motivated by fear of, oh, I can't do this, or I used to be doing this, but now I don't, what's wrong with me? Those are all those negative thoughts that fuel anxiety. We have none of the positive rewards. So basically, we're just fearing and shaming ourselves into obedience. And it's like parenting. You can do that. It's not going to work that well. It's not pleasant for anybody. I personally don't think it's effective. But if there's a positive reward or a connection, you're going to get more buy-in. And I think this is my background as a coach too, that my players, if I just harped on them and yelled at them to do something, that's like that old style of coaching and teaching, you know, you can kind of make people submit and behave, but there's no heart change. There's no why. And I found that when we were really successful, my players understood why they were doing it, which is why I think it's so important in counseling that people are empowered to know the why behind it. Like what's going on in your body? What's going on in your brain? Why does this work? Why does visualization work? Why does positive reward work? Because we're much more likely to do something that we enjoy. Like life is to be enjoyed. And if we go, Jamie said she did this, which is awesome. She said, I did this about the coffee shop with the exposure therapy. And once I was able to stay there and drink, and I would bring a notebook and write down physical sensations while I was there. Like, that's beautiful. You're doing it. You're bringing your belonging in that space. You deserve it. You're worth it. And you're taking power back by claiming what you're feeling in your body too, and getting it out and writing it out. Like, and that's amazing.
And understanding how that anxiety is affecting you. Like it affects everyone differently. And some people, it can be cognitive, really a bunch of mental thoughts coming in. And it can be physical for a lot of people. And so like Jamie, taking the time to understand, okay, this is a physical sensation type of thing, because then we can know, okay, we can kind of, when it starts coming up, we can start to address it and we can start to identify with it type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And some other people have shared, just being a healthcare worker, just walking into the hospital every day has spiked COVID, like my anxiety post-COVID, my social anxiety. Absolutely. I work with so many nurses and doctors. It is very real. I think on top of that too, we're seeing the burnout. Like burnout is even more of that pandemic of what we're seeing in that population right now, and just helping them. And I think that's transpiring into all of society too, the burnout, just this fatigue of, oh, wow, I'm still feeling this way. How do I get out of it? Or then we heap on those negative thoughts of what's wrong with me? When is this going to change? How long am I going to be this way? Forever. And I think putting a timestamp onto it is really good. And so for social anxiety in particular, it's like, okay, if I can gently face my fear of maybe friends ask you on a Monday to hang out for this upcoming Friday. Like on Monday, it's easy to say yes. Mm-hmm. But then usually Friday afternoon comes around and you're like, oh, I wish I didn't say yes. I don't want to do anything. But it could be taking some moments to deep breathe, connect with your body, write down what you're thinking, what you're feeling, visualize yourself having fun and enjoying it. Maybe, again, just reminding yourself of why you want to go, the why behind it, and afterwards seeing if you enjoyed it. Now, most of the time, probably you're going to be really glad that you went and pushed through and acknowledge that. I think this is in our culture where we kind of miss this really important step a lot, is that we just go autopilot to the next thing. We're so busy that we don't ever really reflect on the wins. So I love that Jamie even brought that point up of, Oh, she wrote another one. This is great. I wrote down all my thoughts on the one side of the paper and then all my physical sensations on the other side of that paper. So it's just acknowledging what you're feeling, you're reflecting, and you're integrating that into your brain and your body. You're helping yourself regulate so that next time you're in an anxiety provoking state, you don't go back to that 8 out of 10. You're probably going to go maybe re-triggered to a 6, but 6 is way better than 8. And you reflect again, you do that practice again, you find something else, you talk to a friend, you do something that calms you down. Now, the next time you get re-triggered in a social anxiety situation, you're a 4 out of 10. And it can kind of go down that staircase. So I think this reflecting piece is so, so important of if you go to that cafe, regardless of if you're feeling anxious about COVID and amount of people, or it's more social anxiety specific of what do I say? Oh, I sound like such an idiot, or you're in your own head overthinking. Just pick 1 or 2 things, like have a few go-to phrases that you can already say to people. And maybe we can pick out some of those, but again, reflect on it of, oh, I showed up. I did it. I made a big step today. And that's huge.
And sometimes in those situations, I find what works for me is being curious about other people. If I'm spending all this time focused on myself and this, it just keeps kind of, yeah, it's all me. But if I take a moment to think about, okay, this person I'm going to see, okay, like how are they doing today? What's making them happy? I don't have time to be self-conscious and all this stuff. And so sometimes even doing something nice for someone and planning to do, okay, like I'm going to go to this coffee type of thing, or what does this friend really enjoy? Or asking them type of questions about that. If we're curious about others and focusing on trying to help others, sometimes we can't be stressed about ourselves and what we might be doing right or wrong type of thing.
I love that. Getting out of our own head.
Yeah.
That's why you're such a good therapist, because you can ask good questions for other people.
What's going on in their heads?
So what would you say, like if someone's going to see friends for coffee or in a big setting and we need to break that bigger group down, find one person to talk to, what are like 1 or 2 go-to kind of key phrases you could have in your back pocket, do you think?
Yeah, it depends on kind of how well you know them and things, but just kind of like asking like what brings them joy, or how did they kind of manage the pandemic, and kind of being honest back, saying, you know, like I had a tough time with this, and being honest first, and then saying like how did you find this experience, and kind of letting them know where you're at, and then kind of getting feelers for other people. And just honestly, it's just sometimes just asking people how their day was. We don't do that often enough, or we have just a quick response, but actually taking the time to ask meaningful questions and about people's days or what's going on in their lives, that can have a huge impact on people.
Yeah.
That was the feedback I got from a lot of students, is sometimes like me just saying hi or asking people how their day was. They could be dealing with a lot of stuff, and just that moment, just taking them out of their heads kind of helps them, that people care. Like that's a huge thing that we take for granted sometimes.
Yeah. You belong. You're seen. Yeah, totally. One comment. Yes, people love to talk about themselves. So I make a point to ask questions, which takes the pressure off of me to say the right thing. Oh, I love that. Yes. And then let's see, Cheryl had said earlier that again, this is back to the positive reward comment. Like if we can reflect and identify something positive from that stepping out or that interaction of, wow, I didn't realize how much I missed being together with my friend in person, or I miss going to even these networking events, just seeing all these people. Cheryl says, I love teaching face-to-face and can do that much better than Zooming, like that first year of COVID. And so I just wanted to highlight that, because I think that's the other part, is we look at that more balanced perspective. It doesn't mean, it's going to be rainbows and butterflies and everything's good just because we identify 1 or 2 positive things from that anxiety provoking situation, but we can experience anxiety, and that anxiety could be around social anxiety, or again, some people are sharing a lot more health anxiety specific things. So I would really encourage you look up, because obviously we've seen a spike in that. If you're in Canada, Anxiety Canada, health anxiety, through Anxiety Canada, that's going to be a great resource. ADAA in the States is going to be a great resource, because a lot of these other comments are really more specific to health anxiety, of kind of being worried about coming down with COVID. So go look at that, because if things open up more and more, I think just that gently facing that fear is the way to go. That's how we treat that. That's how we support through that. But just really validating, again, being honoring to where you're at.
Mhm.
And that social component here is a lot of, okay, at least I'm doing it. Like if I want to be with someone, even if I think you've identified what Cheryl was saying was really, it's better in person than on Zoom. So even if I'm have to wear my mask, or I feel more comfortable in that, or I only see a few people for a little bit, totally fine. I'm doing it. Like I'm getting out in person. I think that's really the key here is to help combat that social anxiety.
And yeah, like you said, kind of going to places maybe when you're not meeting someone, but just sitting in like a library or a coffee shop or a public space and just letting your body adjust and feel that anxiety, but then being able to kind of talk to yourself and calm yourself down with different grounding tools, just to that little bit of exposure at your own pace.
So what would be, I'll kind of let it up to the group. Do you have any more questions? But to kind of end, what would be a good grounding technique that people can do that you can do, kind of discreetly too? Like, let's say you're at a coffee shop or something like that, where you can practice one of these grounding techniques, or before you go or after, or while you're there. Nobody necessarily knows you're experiencing anxiety, but you can just be there, connect with your body, and help that calm down.
And so something I kind of do with my clients is counted breathing, and I do with my students as well. And it's just a way to kind of regulate our breathing. Sometimes with anxiety and depression, the physical symptoms that come up are we just elevated blood pressure. We kind of start breathing heavier. Sometimes we get in a little state of panic. Breathing. So in for 4 counts, out for 4 counts, but taking deep, solid breaths and putting your feet on the ground to kind of connect you. Another thing for sensory for some people that we do is pushing your fingers into like you're going 1, 2, 3, 4. And when you get to 5, you're ready to go. Try it out. Hey. But just kind of those little things I understand, okay, is it more mental, like thought process, or is it more physical for you type of thing? Because some people might need to, okay, if those negative voices come up and they start freaking out, I challenge them with, I have a really good friend in their voice, and I know if they saw me in this situation, they would make a joke at me like, what are you doing here, buddy? Like, why are you stressing out? And so using power from other people's voices sometimes to challenge my negative voice that kind of goes off sometimes really helps me, and when it's more of a cognitive thing.
Yeah. And I think the more that we gently face that fear with safe people, like not everybody, that's going to help social anxiety calm down. And then, like you said, you have some tools in your toolbox or ammo to really help when that voice comes back of social anxiety of, oh, don't go, or why would they invite you, or anything like that, because you had a positive interaction with someone and you recognize that, you can reflect on that, and you can build and bring that with you everywhere you go.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on today. And kind of again, to wrap up is, yes, did COVID spike my social anxiety? Probably. Everybody has pretty much experienced this, even if you've never had social anxiety or it was really minimal. Maybe it was like a 2 out of 10. Now you're thinking, oh, wow, I'm like 5 out of 10 or higher. Or maybe you did have some social anxiety before already, 8 out of 10. And now it's like almost to that 10 out of 10. We're seeing everyone pretty much across the board increase a bit. And so be gentle with yourself. Give yourself grace. You've never been here before. You never really thought you'd be here in your whole life. So give yourself a lot of grace. Gently face those fears, find your safe people, and reflect on your wins too. When you're in the moment, pay attention. Like Lauren gave you some really good grounding techniques. Even Jamie's example of being at a coffee shop, writing down what she's thinking, writing down those physical sensations, and really highlighting what Lauren talked about of integrating the brain and the body. Like for some of us, we're going to be in our thoughts and we can identify those, but some of us, we can't, and it's right away in our body. And so paying attention to that, there's no right or wrong. It's just working with someone who can help teach you that, and it helps integrate, which would then calm that social anxiety. But bottom line, everybody's experiencing it. Walk in thinking, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. I just want to show up and do my best, give myself grace, be proud of myself, visualize maybe myself being successful before I go, and being proud of myself for showing up, of what's honoring to me, what feels safe and comfortable. And like I said, gently face those fears. It doesn't mean jumping into a crowded 100,000 person football game if you're not feeling comfortable there. If you are, awesome. You're probably still going to have social anxiety though. And so there's just a whole different spectrum, but start small and start what's comfortable to you and honoring to you, and celebrate the little things there. Yes. Okay, good. Yes. To just kind of wrap up, Jamie has also said counting colors when you get really anxious. So for example, looking around and trying to five things that are red, blue, or green. Yes, we definitely teach on that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding technique of 5 things that you see. So it would be like white cup, black lid, 4 things you feel. It could be like your feet firmly planted in the ground or your shirt. So the feeling, we want to use all our senses. 3 things you hear, which if you're in a cafe, especially, or a lecture hall or a meeting room, that's going to be a good one too, of you can do all these without anybody knowing you're doing it in your brain. And it could be 2 things that you smell, 1 thing you taste, or mix them up. It doesn't have to be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It could be 5 of each sense, or 3, or, whatever calms you down. But the senses really help calm that brain down and that body. So thank you. Some meditation too. I'm glad that so many people can relate with worrying about some of these things. And
sometimes just journaling, like when you have those thoughts, journaling them out and then looking at them and then actually questioning those thoughts, like, oh, this is actually what I've been worried about, and kind of, just addressing them.
And I think that can kind of piggyback onto maybe some of the health anxiety of, we could be afraid and never go anywhere. And what would life look like then? And if you write those out, like how many times has that happened? What's the worst case scenario? Like sometimes we do have to go through, play that movie out in our brain and take steps of what you're doing to protect yourself or what just you feel comfortable. And everybody has different comfort levels. So just honoring to you of what that looks like. But again, I think writing it out is going to be really helpful, because if we don't challenge it, that fear is going to feel so real, sound so real in our head until we get it out, until we challenge it, and until in ways that feel honoring to us.
Yeah. And remembering that anxiety, it's necessary. Like everyone experiences it because it's there to try and help protect us in certain situations. But it's when we let that anxiety kind of, like, everyone's experienced it, but we let it get out of control and focus on it almost too much type of thing. That's the issue. But everyone, it's supposed to be there to help us type of thing. It's a good thing sometimes.
Yes. Well, I hope you all, thank you for coming on today, Lauren. Thank you, all the listeners, for coming on and interacting. Thank you for coming on and listening to the recording too, everybody. So I hope that something of these resonated with you. Again, practice one, lean into one of these tips this week. You do not have to do all of them. If there's one thing that you just feel connected or, oh, I'm not alone, that in and of itself is a huge win. If one of these strategies can help you, practice them gently. And again, it's like riding a bike. You may not get it right away. It might not take away all the anxiety. That's not the goal. It's actually to have a little bit of social anxiety or a little bit of anxiety, but one that we can move around in, that we can manage in, that we can actually thrive in, not just try to claw our way out and survive in. So we want to be able to move around it. And we just value you all for coming on. And Lauren, thank you. Thank you so much again too.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, have a great